everyone, and welcome to our very first live stream. Can you believe it? We're a little bit behind the technology here, but we finally got it. And we are live on StreamYard. So whether you're joining us from YouTube, from Facebook, or LinkedIn, welcome. And please put in the comments where you're dialing in from. We'd like to know who's in our audience today. Today, I am going to share with you my passion for authentic leadership and how I combine that passion with my other passion, which is podcasting, to help you increase employee engagement. But first, a quick video. To become one of the top 100 leading women in the automotive industry. I learned how to assimilate into different corporate cultures, to be what they wanted me to be, to fit their mold. I felt if I wanted to be successful, I had to act a certain way, look a certain way. Everyone in the corporate world knows exactly what I'm talking about. That feeling that you have to mask certain parts of yourself in order to please someone else, that you live in fear of judgment, in fear of not being liked, even the fear of being fired. In that culture, you may learn to survive, but you will never thrive. Enter the world of authentic leadership. Authentic leaders know who they are. They live and lead in line with their values. They're comfortable in their own skin. When they speak, you listen. They attract the very best talent around the world and they empower them to do their very best work. They create for people to thrive. Gravitas is the hallmark of authentic leadership. Your quest for gravitas starts with an understanding of authentic leadership. What is it all about? I've taken all of my experience and lessons learned to curate the 21 traits of authentic leadership. I've created a series of tools, really pathways to engage in deeper conversation about authentic leadership. These are ways for us to tap into that deep, innate human desire to connect with each other at a human to human level. Gravitas Detroit empowers you. Gravitas shatters the mold of corporate leadership to allow authentic leadership to shine through. It creates an environment where people can thrive, where people are inspired. They're galvanized around the mission. I'm Jan Griffiths. Join me on your quest for gravitas. Okay, great. Thank you. I know we had a couple of hiccups there with the volume. We'll work on that for the next time. But again, welcome. We love to know who's online, so please drop us a comment and let us know. And if you don't know, I am the host of the Finding Gravitas Authentic Leadership podcast. And I fell in love with podcasting as a way to communicate really on a human to human level. Gone are the days of corporate communication. Do you remember those days of reading those awful corporate emails when we would just skim through those emails and you try to glean some information and then you just moved on with life, right? That's not the way to communicate. People want human to human communication. And I learned this and I learned the value of audio through podcasting through my podcast, Finding Gravitas. And we feature leaders who truly are authentic leaders and we encourage them to share their stories. And as I was going through my podcast, I launched my podcast now for 2 years. I thought, this podcast is public facing, meaning anybody can access it on any podcast platform. But what if you were to take this concept of podcasting and apply it internally to a company and to an organization, how powerful would that be? And I found myself saying things like, okay, I see we have a problem here with the audio. Hold on one second. Let me switch to a different microphone and see what I can do. Hold on. Okay, let's try this microphone. Is this any better? Okay, maybe Aubrey, can you tell me if this microphone is any better? Yes. Okay, great. Not good that somebody promoting a podcast has audio issues, but hey, there we go, right? So I was thinking about how we take this audio medium and really use it for people to communicate internally within a company, because it's so difficult, particularly with the virtual world that we live in and people working from home. How do you keep people connected at a human to human level? How do you do that? So I found myself saying, if I were to go back into the corporate world, then I would start my own podcast. And I thought, wow, that's not a bad idea. And the more that I socialized this with people, they said, you know what? That's a great idea. And then I learned that some companies had tried it and failed. And that's not surprising. In fact, most podcasts, public facing podcasts, fail after 7 episodes. There's a lot involved. It's not rocket science, but there's a lot to it. And you've really got to approach it as a business project, just like you would any other project in business. So you have to decide, first of all, is your interest in podcasting, is it public or private? And what that means is simply this. Is it public? Is it something you're going to put on LinkedIn, on Apple? Is it going to go out to the public? Or is it truly private for your own company, for maybe your own department, your own team of people? So that's step one. And what we're trying to do is to really make sure that people feel connected in the workplace to drive those high levels of employee engagement. And one of the best ways to do that is to be authentic, of course, but to drive transparency and open up this world of human to human communication to keep people just so well connected. And not in a way where they were stuck at a screen. Like right now, you're looking at a screen, you're kind of stuck there. People want options. They want to be able to consume content on their terms. When you're walking, when you're working out, you could be doing laundry, whatever you're doing. I mean, I consume podcast content multiple different ways, but you want it on demand on your terms. And so I started to think more about the benefits of a podcast and started to do some research. And here's some interesting facts on podcasting. We already talked about the fact that it's relatable, it's not sanitized by corporate, you're not trying to control the message, but from a neuroscience standpoint, it actually stimulates mental imagery and activates dopamine in the brain, which is the feel-good hormone, right? And the reason, this is how it does that. When you're listening to audio, you put yourself into the story because you're listening to the conversation. So you're not watching something. You have to really think about what you're listening to and put yourself into that conversation. That's incredibly powerful. There's a statistic out there that says 500% increased comprehension over text. So when you're talking about corporate messaging and corporate communications, and you want to get messages through to people, when you do it using the audio platform through a podcast, they're much more likely to retain that information. Of course, the branding, you can manage the branding yourself. And there's all kinds of metrics that I'm going to share with you that you can get that you can't get on your typical corporate email system. And it's cost effective. Podcasting is a lot more cost effective than you might think. And it is certainly more cost effective than video or something that's more produced. Before you start with a podcast, you've got to know your why. Why are you doing it? And I think one of the best ways to start to craft your why is to look at an employee engagement survey. Look at your last employee engagement survey. What are the issues? What are the messages? Communication comes up all the time in employee engagement. So start there. Is it an issue, and what needs to be improved for communication for your company? And you start to develop a strategy, because remember, you have to approach this as if it's any other business project. You start with a why, and you start with a strategy behind it. So who is your target audience? Is it everybody in the company? Is it a certain segment? Start to build an audience avatar. From that, you can start to create episode themes. You don't just shove a microphone in front of somebody and say, hey, we're going to do a podcast. Here we go. That doesn't work. Maybe you start with meet the executive. That's always a good one. People want to see senior leadership in companies as more relatable. Get them talking. Could be an interview format, could be just a solo recording format. Maybe you want to do something with certain functions. Maybe you want to feature a department or function on a periodic basis. Maybe you want to do an employee spotlight, maybe recognition, maybe technology. The ideas for podcast themes are endless. Then you have to think about frequency and duration. When I started my podcast, I started every week. It was a really bad idea. It was way too much. Every other week is a really good frequency to have. If you go every month, it's not enough, because you've got to keep the content coming. The duration, I have two different types of episodes that I run on my podcast. One is long form interview with a high level leader that typically gets into a lot of detail, that runs, 45 minutes to an hour. And then I run a solo episode, which is 15 to 20 minutes. For internal podcasting, I would recommend no more than 15 minutes. And then, just like any other business project, you need a budget, right? What is your budget? And I'll be able to share some numbers with you as we go through this presentation to help you build your budget. You need a launch date. If you don't set a launch date, it's not going to happen. I pushed my launch date out for my podcast several times. Get the launch date, get a timeline, and bring all the stakeholders in that you need to make this thing happen. I'll go into metrics in just a moment, but stakeholder buy-in is important. In a corporation, in any sort of company, this usually falls, the idea of a podcast falls into one of two areas. It's either HR or communications, or both. Somebody's got to own it, but I see both functions, working very closely together. Because remember, you're trying to drive an employee engagement metric, or it could be a communications metric, or both. So the process. You need the project owner. Somebody's got to own it. You've got to know what your internal bandwidth is. And most companies are telling me today that they really don't have the bandwidth, or they tried it and it failed. And it fails for a number of reasons. They don't understand the process, exactly what's involved with it. It doesn't really have a good why or a good strategy behind it. And simply, people just don't understand the tech that's involved. And so it's sort of, it'll go for a few episodes and then it fails. But there's ways to make sure that that doesn't happen. So there's a few things that you need to know about the process. You need to know your internal bandwidth. So who's going to do it? There's got to be a project owner internally, no matter what you decide to do. How much of this are you going to outsource? Are you going to have an interviewer and a guest? Is that how this is going to work? There needs to be an agreement on how this process is going to work. You'll need some recording software. There are free options out there. I use Zencaster. It's very reasonable. It's, $20, $30 a month, but there is free recording software available. You will need an editor for audio. And people who think, again, that you can just grab this microphone and start talking and you produce a high quality podcast. No, it doesn't work that way. You need an editor. One of the reasons that podcasts fail is because they've got shitty audio quality. And I'm sure you've listened to a podcast and then maybe the host, the interviewer is fine and the guest comes on and it's just awful. And you hear the echo and they tune out, which is kind of interesting considering I started this with really shitty audio. But hey, hopefully I recovered. And then once you have a recording, so you've got the process, you've got the content, you've got a recording. In the audio editing, they'll improve the audio quality, and they will also take out, maybe the ums and ahs and some mistakes in there that you don't want to come out. So they'll make a nice audio recording. Then you have to decide where you're going to host it. Now, for a public facing platform, facing podcast, it's pretty easy. You can push it out to iTunes or Spotify. But if this is an internal podcast, you certainly don't want that out in a public network where anybody can access it. I use a hosting platform for both my public and private clients for podcast hosting. I use a hosting platform called Captivate. And what that does is it gives me the ability to keep it private. So for private corporate clients, I'm able to give them a website and we generate a QR code. And then the client is able to take that QR code and put it anywhere you want. You can embed it. You can embed what they call the pod player into your intranet. You can simply post the QR code for companies who have perhaps manufacturing sites in different parts of the world. We don't want to get into all these firewall discussions. So a simple QR code going to a pod player on a website will take care of it. Is it 100% secure? Of course not. I would never put hand on heart and say that it is. But here's a question with security for an internal private podcast. If you're really that concerned that somebody's going to listen to the content, then you probably shouldn't be doing it. I can lock it down with a QR code to a website so it's not on a public platform. But if somebody wants to share that audio outside of your company, they're going to find a way to do it. There are extremely expensive platforms that will lock down the security so that only certain people with certain emails can access it. But they're crazy expensive. And quite frankly, I don't think you need it. So that's a little bit about the process. The equipment. When I first started podcasting, I knew nothing. I didn't know anything about anything. And this is what I've learned. There's 3 things that you need to know about equipment. I don't know that room technically qualifies, but it's important. But you've got to have a good microphone. Now, the microphone that was sort of the crappy microphone that you heard earlier is actually one of the best microphones you can buy. I don't know why it wasn't working properly earlier, but it's a Shure SM7B, and that's the same microphone that Joe Rogan uses. It's about $400. You don't need that unless you're a professional podcaster like me, but you do need a separate microphone. And this one I have right here, it's called a USB Mini. And don't worry about writing all of this down. We've got a mini course that you can access to get all this equipment information. This USB Mini is about $99. That's all you need to produce good quality audio. And then you need a set of headphones. The headphones are important because you have to separate the audio files from the podcaster, the person doing the interviewing, and your guest, because you need 2 separate clean audio files so that you can produce, your audio editor can produce a nice piece of content. And I didn't understand that in the beginning. And I do now because I know what it's like when you don't separate the audio files. The headphones aren't as important as the microphone. So you can get away with really cheap headphones as long as you're separating the audio files so that the interviewer's voice doesn't come back out through the speakers and into the guest microphone. That's basically it. The room. Don't ever record in a room that's got hard walls. This picture is actually a really bad picture because there's a brick wall behind the guy. You want as much soft furnishings in the room as you can to prevent that echo. One of the best quality podcasts that I actually did was with Ann Carter, and I recorded her. She might kill me for saying this, but I recorded her in her closet, in her bedroom closet, because the sound dampening was great with all the clothes around her. Now, I'm not suggesting that you record your guests in their bedroom closets, but do not record them in an empty room with hard walls. Just make sure there's a lot of soft furnishings in the room. The metrics. I love talking about the metrics. There's actually this, I see the animation isn't going to work on this, but that's okay. So you got to know really, what are you trying to do here? The who, the what, the when, the where, and the how. And with podcasting metrics, I can tell you how many people have downloaded the podcast. I cannot tell you the IP address. That would be a privacy issue, obviously. I certainly cannot say the email address, but I can pinpoint where in the globe they are down to a country level and how many listeners you have, meaning how many times the person or the podcast episode gets downloaded. When you're working with a private podcast and you come through the podcast, so you're not coming through Spotify or iTunes, you're coming through that QR code into the website link, I can actually tell you when people drop off that episode. So the chart that you're looking at right now will tell you of the 19 listeners when they dropped off the episode. So that really helps you understand the content. So if you were to do a series on executives, meet the executive, you could tell which executives actually retained the audience's attention more than others, because you can tell when people drop off, which I find is fascinating. But I can't get this on my public facing podcast. It's only when they come through on the website link. Promotion. How do you bring people to the podcast? If you just put a podcast out there, does some sort of magic happen and people come? No, you have to promote it, whether you're promoting it internally or externally. If you promote it internally, same philosophy, same principle applies. Promote it heavily. Use something to come up with maybe the podcast art. Maybe you want to have a competition internally to come up with a podcast art, to come up with the theme music, to come up with the name of the podcast. And then once you have all of that together, then you're ready to launch it. I would always recommend that you have at least 4 to 5 episodes in the pipeline before you launch. Then hit it hard. A launch event, a launch party, something. Give out gifts, freebies, and start to promote it heavily on social. Now, the other benefit to a podcast, and often people don't think about this because they think of podcasts as being audio, which it is, but not everybody likes to consume their content via audio. With a podcast, you have what we call show notes. So if you ever click on a podcast and you'll see like a little summary of the podcast, that's the show note for the podcast. So it's like a little summary that you can use for blogs, and then the transcript. I will tell you, I am drowning in content right now with transcripts and show notes. You can use it internally. You can use quotes, particularly if you're doing Meet the Executive. You can take quotes from those transcripts and you can push them out and repurpose that content. And then you can produce audiograms. Do you ever see those little blurbs where you see the waveform and it's a short video and you just hear a little snippet of the audio? That's an audiogram. They're extremely powerful and great for internal communication. And then you might want a video. I don't video my podcast interviews, but it's something that you could do. But again, that tends to add a little bit more expense to it. And voice search is the next evolution of SEO. So it really is all about voice. And that really is it in a nutshell. I know we went fast, but I wanted to give you a lot of information as quickly as possible. And I am open to answer any and all of your questions. So fire away. And I'd also love to know, I see a few people online. I see a few friendly faces there. I see Paul Cloutier. Good to see you. Caitlin, nice to see you. And Antonella, great. So ask your questions, fire away. I think we have a bit of a pause here before the questions come up. And whilst we're waiting for the questions to come up, we have 3 different podcast options that we provide to people. So we can do, and you can hit the QR code will take you to the different options. If you want to do some of this yourself and you want somebody else to just hold your hand through it, we got an option for that. If you want to do an internal podcast, but you just don't have the bandwidth, you want somebody else to do it, we can handle absolutely everything, including handling the interviewing internally. So we've got all kinds of different options for you to look at. And, as always, if you have any questions at all, please, you can email me directly at jan@gravitasdetroit.com or visit our website at gravitasdetroit.com and go to the company podcast page, and you'll see a ton of information in there. There's also a blog that we've written that goes into a lot more detail, and that blog is on this website page. When you hit the QR code, scroll all the way down and you can access it. It's all free information. So that's it. It's fast and furious, but I wanted to get it out there. I will tell you, my passion for authentic leadership and open and transparent communication, combining with podcasting, it's a wonderful, exciting place to be. And we're getting better at it every single day. So please, hit us up. We want to hear from you. Put your comments up. Any tips? Oh, this is a really good one. Any tips? Hold on a second. Let me get that here. Any tips on getting execs or staff to do well speaking on a podcast? Yes, that is an excellent question. And we actually have a course on how to be a great podcast guest. And maybe I can get Abby to put that link in the comments for you. It's a really short course, and it will certainly help. It helps a lot with the tech, but if you're talking about their presence, and you need to have a little bit more than just what we're providing on this course, then feel free to get a hold of me, because we have some coaching that's designed around that to do exactly that. That's a great question, Jennifer. Thank you. All right. Is there, next question, is there a lot of other equipment needed for video podcasting, and where should you post that content? Is different platforms or just audio? Great question. For video, it's entirely up to you. I work with a company called Flow Video, and they do an amazing job at the video setup. And that's a great way to do it. And of course, you need cameras. Joe Rogan has a totally separate system that he uses for that, with different cameras that they can bring in, showing different camera angles at different times. So that's a little bit more sophisticated. And then when you post the content, you can post it out to YouTube. I can post everything from my audio platform out to YouTube, even just as an audio file. So yes, you can post out to different platforms. Okay, well, I think we are right at we're out of time right now, but please feel free to reach out to me directly, jan@gravitasdetroit.com. I am so excited to be in this world of podcasting. I am actually speaking at PodFest this year, the end of May in Orlando. And if you had told me 5 years ago I would be a podcaster, I would probably have laughed. But here we are. So have a great one. And thank you all for joining our podcast today. Have a good one. Bye.